All right, guys, I just want to welcome back to the Gridiron Gurus podcast. Today, me and Nick here are going to be looking at 5 potential destinations for Tyreek Hill, who recently came available in the free agent market. This was expected after, a devastating leg injury that he would be parting ties with Miami. I definitely think the Kansas City Chiefs could be in play for him, but he's not going to be. They're not going to be on this list. They have some cap issues. This is a guy that still has to have another surgery, so we're not sure when he'll be really available. But I think the Chiefs are definitely in play if they figure out the money. But we're going to leave them off this list. Getting things started with the Tennessee Titans. Why it makes sense for Tennessee, this is a team that has a lot of money, almost $100 million in cap space. They can likely make the strongest offer to Hill if money's going to be a factor here. Last year, Cam Ward showed off the charts potential. Now you have Brian Dable as the offensive coordinator, so you have a lot of things trending in the right direction for this offense. It's a youthful wide receiver group. They have a lot of young guys. Shamiri DK, Alec Manor were really good last year. Calvin Ridley, a veteran, hasn't really produced, and he's definitely overpaid for the Titans. This is a veteran presence that can come in, have some fun, help elevate Cam Ward's game. Probably not going to compete for much, though, Nick. This is still one of the worst teams in the NFL, but I think they're going to slowly continue to get better. They're still in a deep rebuild, all things considered. So the short term, you're not going to be able to compete for a whole lot of wins. And the offense still kind of lacks that supporting cast. It might be a lot of heavy lifting for Tyreek Hill, but he could also go out there and have fun with these young guys, and they can really grow together. And he could still be an explosive playmaker while you have these other guys really progressing in their game. I think the prospect of playing with Cam Ward is very exciting, Nick. Living in Nashville is not bad either. And again, I think the strongest offer can be made if he's still worried about money at this point in his career. And I wouldn't blame him for doing that, especially coming off an injury that could have easily ended his career, and it still certainly could. But I think the Titans, if his market is not as favorable when it comes to contenders showing interest, the Titans would make a lot of sense for him to slot into.
I think if he goes purely based off money, I think this is the best fit and makes the most sense because they have a ton of money to play with at $99 million in cap space, and they could use a veteran player to kind of coach up and work with that wide receiving core that does have a lot of talent, just a younger core. Obviously, Cam Ward is an attractive player to potentially play with at quarterback. Ward showed a lot of potential in his first year, and it's certainly hard to get a full grade on Ward because he was getting hit the entire time, and he really didn't have a whole lot to work with in terms of talent around him. But I think Ward has shown that he can be a good quarterback in the NFL as thing goes. Brian Dable as the offensive coordinator certainly isn't unattractive either. I think that'd be really solid to see. The Titans, though, they're not going to be winning the AFC South anytime soon. They're in deep rebuild here, and I don't know if it's necessarily wise to spend a ton of money on a player that's coming off of a massive injury and just not really in the prime of his career, pushing towards that point where now he's getting older, played for the league for a while now. I believe it'd be his 10th or 11th season this upcoming year. So I think this fit would be a very interesting one. I don't know if it necessarily is going to happen, but they potentially give him a lot of money. I don't know if it makes a ton of sense for Tennessee, but they can offer a ton of money and it could work out in the long run. Be curious to see what type of offer they throw at him, and if he's interested in trying to play for a contender, taking a pay cut to play for a contender, or if he's going to look to try and join the spot that gives him the most money. Nashville can certainly offer the most money.
We're going to move to number two, the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is a team last year that had a very ancient offense, is how I described it. If you watch them throughout the year, not just saying that because Aaron Rodgers is 40 something years old, but he played pretty solid football at times, and these receivers were not making plays. DK Metcalf, of course, he had his nonsense towards the end of the year. There was a lot on the line for them, and he was suspended a game or two, and that definitely could have been a problem for this team. They still made the playoffs at the end of the day. I think he had a big drop against the Texans, though, so even your top guy was struggling to make plays. Calvin Austin never really did anything. Scotty Miller wasn't great. Marquez Valdez-Scantling either. It's just a receiving group that needs help, and they need someone who can stretch the field and do it consistently and make plays. And I think you could create a lightning slash thunder type duo with DK Metcalf. So that's very exciting, right? The receiver again is a top need for this offense. I think most still believe the Steelers can compete. Mike Tomlin has stepped aside. Insert Mike McCarthy. So a regime change is very interesting and something to monitor. And that could definitely mean that they might not be as competitive, right? Because the roster isn't going to really change a whole lot this offseason. Only the coaching staff, and they were always competitive under Tomlin. Rodgers, though, he did have a lot of inconsistent play last year. Overall, just stagnantness from the Pittsburgh offense is a big reason to be concerned. But obviously, if you're inserted into this offense, Tyreek Hill, you got to think that you're going to help elevate them to more consistency. And I think weather could be a concern, Nick, which is crazy because these guys are professionals. But we just saw a theme with him in Miami, really the whole offense, where when they went up north or anywhere else that was cold, they were not good one bit. And Pittsburgh has some of the worst weather in terms of temperature in the entire NFL. So I think this makes a lot of sense from a pros and cons aspect. What are your thoughts on him potentially being a Steeler?
think this is interesting because in my opinion, the Steelers are still the favorites to win the AFC North this upcoming season. I still think they're in the best spot. Obviously, the Ravens will be in contention for that division. I don't think the Bengals or certainly not the Browns will be competing for the AFC North title right now. Obviously, if Joe Burrow stays fully healthy, maybe the Bengals can make a run at it. But I think that's again a major contingency at this moment in time and a major what if. But I look at the Steelers. I think this is a roster that still has a lot of talent. The defensive side of the ball is still good. I think that McCarthy is not a bad coach. I think people are flipping out over it. I don't think it's the worst hire in the world. I think he's still a guy that can get a lot out of guys. And I think, when you look at this roster, it's whether or not he wants to play with Aaron Rodgers. If Aaron Rodgers is going to be the starter, there's a lot of question marks about the quarterback play, and that may be tough for a free agent wide receiver to say, hey, I'm going to go jump into a quarterback room situation where I don't know exactly who's going to be throwing me the football. That could be certainly an issue, but him and Metcalf together would be a really solid. The offense does need some help. I think they can make it work money-wise, and the Steelers, I think they can still be a playoff team. They're still in a good spot to compete, and he would add some flash to an offense that has been dull and mundane for a very long time, has not been able to really compete at a high level. This could really be solid for both parties involved and get them competing, get them to continue to win AFC North titles.
Moving to number three, this is one I really like. San Francisco 49ers. Brandon Ayuk's done. He's not coming back. Juwan Jennings is a free agent. His team doesn't have a whole lot of money, so he's definitely not going to command top pay by any means. But he can get a respectable paycheck, can slot in for a team that needs pass catchers. George Kittle, he might not be available for the first part of next year, coming off a leg injury of his own in that playoff game. So they're going to need someone to come in there, especially a veteran, because the rest of the groups, respectively, I guess there's some veterans in there, but for the most part, your top dogs are going to be younger players. And Hill, he's a guy that can win in on screens. He can win downfield as a vertical threat. Brandon Ayuk, of course, is a guy that won in the short to intermediate range with strong hands. So it's not exactly similar type players when it comes to the skill set, but it seems like the 49ers have distanced themselves from Ayuk a long time ago. This is still a winning culture. They don't want to be involved in that nonsense that Ayuk was putting around Nick this past season, not wanting to show up to the building to really try and even play football again. Instant chance to compete for a ring. This makes a lot of sense for Tyreek Hill. And again, I think what Kyle Shanahan did this past year was just miraculous. And this is a team that has a good young quarterback in Brock Purdy. Christian McCaffrey still playing some of the best football of his career. This would be an ideal offense. They know how to get players involved. You're going to produce. They're going to put you in positions to succeed. So I think it checks a lot of boxes, Nick, for Tyreek Hill. Playing out west is probably not going to be as desirable for some free agents. And, has that Super Bowl window potentially passed for San Francisco? I know that kind of coincides with my winning culture statement. I don't think the window has fully closed yet, but some might think that it has. What's your thoughts on Hill to San Francisco? I love this idea of him going out there.
I love this idea as well. I don't think the window is closed. I think San Francisco are still in a perfect opportunity to compete for a Super Bowl. This is still a very talented roster. They're just missing a few pieces, and they just got to certainly get healthy. The wide receiving core does need some help, and Hill would be a phenomenal, attractive option. They have stability at quarterback. Brock Purdy is their guy, and he's been really solid when on the field. So I think that's an attractive thing. And I think there's a winning culture, solid coaching there. And I think Shanahan's system could really work well for Tyreek Hill, who's speedy and could be a big impact in that. I think he's a great replacement. Better than Brandon Ayuk. Plug him in, replace him immediately, and adds an instant impact in this offense. The money thing is certainly an issue, right? Because they don't have exactly the cap ability to kind of pay him what he may want. So that's certainly an issue. And I don't know, again, I don't know if he necessarily wants to play for the 49ers, but I think it could work out. And this is a team that's still, I think, competitive in a tough division, the NFC West. And he adds a lot of speed and certainly improves their opportunity to contend with the way that he can play on the field, get speed, and be a big, key, impactful player immediately. This could really work out for all parties involved if the money is right and they can structure the deal properly.
Now moving to number four, the Buffalo Bills. This is a team that once again was not able to make a run in the playoffs. And Josh Allen needs help. This receiving core is not good, and Buffalo's not done a very good job of putting him in positions to succeed. I know he had a couple of turnovers against the Broncos, but he's got to break his back out here, Nick. We don't have a very good receiving group. The GM pretty much threw the head coach under the bus, and then he got a promotion for it. Brandon Beanie's made pretty bad decisions. Keon Coleman, I think he's a respectable player, and I feel like he can still be good. He just hasn't lived up to the expectations as far. Josh Palmer got signed to a bad contract. Curtis Samuel's still on roster. Brandon Cooks ended up having to be our best receiver late in the year, a guy who's an aging veteran who I really didn't even know was still around until the last couple of weeks of the year. So this has just not been a very good position for them, Nick. Dawson Knox is even making like $15 million this year in terms of a cap hit. So they've really put themselves in a bad position when it comes to these playmakers. Tyreek Hill, This is another opportunity where, again, he's probably not going to make a whole lot of money, but who would not want to play with Josh Allen? He can throw the football 70 yards. Who can run it down from 70 yards out? Tyreek Hill certainly can. We're hoping for the best when it comes to his recovery, but he's certainly going to have some shiftiness. He's still going to be a dynamic receiver. Then get him involved in a multitude of different aspects. Joe Brady's the head coach now, still going to coach this offense to a T. You already know he's going to get involved. It's going to make a lot of sense. Again, the money thing, that's probably going to be why it doesn't make sense. It's going to be common sense on some of these teams that don't have a whole lot of cap, right? But you can compete for a championship, you'd like to think, because the Bills are always one of the top records in the league. And another reason why it might not succeed is just because they keep running into that wall in the playoffs where we can't get over the hump. And I think Hilly's still going to be want to be competitive, right? And go out there and be able to potentially get a Super Bowl in Buffalo. It just seems like they are backtracking big time, Nick, and that window for them seems like it's closing more than San Francisco's.
I think the window is closing in Buffalo, but I want to say there's a big key difference maker. It's the quarterback. If there's one quarterback that I want to play for in the NFL, it's Josh Allen. Probably the only quarterback I'd want to play for more is Tyreek Hill's former quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. I think those are the two guys you want to play for if you're a free agent, the opportunity to play for quarterbacks. You know Allen's going to get you the football. You know Allen's going to be accurate, give you opportunities to be a key difference maker, get you the football, and really be a big asset. Allen is absolutely incredible. He is so talented across the board, and he could really do a lot with Tyreek Hill, who's a speedy player and can plug into that offense. I think the Bills are going in the wrong direction. I agree with that assessment. I don't know what the money looks like exactly up in Buffalo, but that could be a really fun and interesting fit for a guy that could plug in and get things done immediately and be impactful on this offense. The Bills need pass catchers, and Josh Allen's had to be Superman without great talent around him for the last couple of years. Give him a weapon like Tyreek Hill, who's super speedy, productive in the end zone, and really a great yards receiver in general. That would be a phenomenal asset. Would really work out well for the Bills.
Over to the final potential destination here for Tyreek, the Baltimore Ravens. This is a team that still has a loaded roster. They missed a kick to miss the playoffs last year. Came down to the final play early on in the season. They had a lot of injuries, including Lamar Jackson, so they were playing from behind in terms of their record in the standings, anyways. Harbaugh ended up getting canned, so they're going to also move to a different regime after a while. The big three of Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Tyreek Hill is a very intriguing play. And this is a guy who's always been a big fan of Lamar Jackson's game. Tyreek Hill's always shown him a ton of love. And this is an opportunity to add even more speed and dynamicness to this offense, if that's even a word. I just think it'd be scary, right? This would be a team that everyone would want to use on Madden if they had those three, for example. They could just be an abundance of skill. The Ravens do need more playmaking at pass catcher. This has been a big problem for them. Zay Flowers at times disappears. The tight end group, it's great, but it's also been inconsistent. We have DeAndre Hopkins out there, forced to be one of our top receivers. Tylan Wallace and Rashad Bateman. Bateman did play better this past year, but those two guys were former draftees I thought would be good, but really just not lived up to the level they should be for being NFL wide receivers. Tez Walker I thought was also really good, but we just don't have that real X factor. And Tyreek Hill might be the guy that could really open up this offense. I don't believe that the Ravens need a whole lot at receiver, Nick, to compete. We don't need a Jamar Chase or a Justin Jefferson to be strong. We just need someone that can open things up a little bit more for us downfield. Tyreek Hill can absolutely do that. Obviously, we have a new staff in town, could create some uncertainty. Maybe the vision's going to be different for this offense. Maybe Lamar's not even in the fold for the Ravens moving forward. Mid-tier offer, most likely, of only $22 million in cap. And again, kind of like most of these other teams, weather could be a factor for him. Kind of a cop-out thing for me, right? But I think it's a legitimate concern with how we saw him in Miami, Nick. So the weather is definitely worth discussing, but I think this makes a lot of sense. I think at the end of the day, he will be a Baltimore Raven in 2026.
I like this fit a lot. I think he'll be a Baltimore Raven. It makes a ton of sense. I will say there was one thing I do want to say. A lot of times in the NFL, there's things that on paper look like really good ideas, but in theory they're not. Yeah, on paper having a bunch of speedy receivers plus Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry looks really good, but how does that actually play in theory? Maybe doesn't play as well as you think it does. That's certainly one thing you want to take a look at, but I think this could work out phenomenally. I think this is a team that just needs a little bit more punch at wide receiver. They have some good pieces, but I think they just need a little bit more speed. And there again, I think they're in a division they can win. I think Lamar Jackson is always going to be that X factor. And you've seen a lot of strides of Lamar Jackson as a passer, and I think he's a attractive player to play with, similar to Mahomes and Allen. I think Mahomes and Allen obviously are slightly more attractive, but this is a player that people still potentially want to play around. They need weapons, right? They need playmakers. They need guys who can step up and be key impacts immediately. A new scheme in town, a new coaching staff. I think it could work out really well. I love this fit. I think it's my favorite fit on the list. I think it's where he's going to ultimately end up is Baltimore. I think it makes too much sense. They'll make a deal. They'll make it work and kind of figure it out with the money. But if he wants to go out and win, this is the best spot for him to do so. Besides potentially the Chiefs, if he wants to have a reunion there, this could be a lot of fun. I like this fit a lot. This makes a ton of sense to me.
Before we cap things off, what's your prediction? Mine's Baltimore. Where do you think he goes?
Yeah, I'm gonna go Baltimore. I think this makes too much sense for me. I think this is a great fit. This is a team that I think can still be competitive for a Super Bowl in the AFC. I think they are a talented roster. I think they have a good new staff they've put together. The division is very winnable, and they have a great pieces. And Lamar Jackson is your ready-made quarterback already, who is one of the best in the league throwing the football to you. I think that's gonna be attractive to Tyreek Hill. I could see the Chiefs happening too if they could find a way to work the money. Obviously, that's kind of a cop-out answer. I don't know if they can make the money work in Kansas City. I think they can make the money work in Baltimore. I think the Ravens make a ton of sense. That's my official guess.
For this episode, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.